thought you're staying tired. Can't do it,
I guess we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. Welcome to the March 22nd, 2022. Sorry for the typo on the agenda there. Meeting of the Water Committee. We've kind of graduated in part from one aspect of our business, and we're moving into a second phase that'll sort of start today. Before we begin, I'd like to open up the opportunity for anyone from the public who'd like to offer comments, thoughts, or questions. Anybody here in the audience would like to do that?
A lot of shy faces out there.
Anyone online would like to contribute? I don't see anyone. All right, then we'll move on. Briefly, I'll just highlight, we had back on the last City Council meeting, we had the opportunity to go and visit with City Council and present the conservation memo, which I think everybody had the opportunity to look at, make their mark on, and contribute to. I think it was very well received. I understand that the city manager is going to be undertaking some of the strategies immediately, some of the conservation efforts, and I think he'll be coming back within a month or 6 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, Jeff, on sort of a proposal for near-term things to be accomplished, and then some budgetary items will have to roll into the next fiscal year. But I thought it was pretty well received. There was a lot of interest from the council members.
I agree, and the city manager did contact me to see if I would continue to participate to help city implement those, having just come out working for the utilities for all those years. So happy to do that. And so, yeah, I think there will be some, I'll call them immediate actions, as basically as quickly as I can get him some proposals. But we did a good job, I thought, of listing what was easily implemented, and then there's kind of a moderate, and then there's really hard, some of them. So, yeah, I do. They're very excited about it. The council was very receptive, and so we'll be moving forward immediately.
Great. Thanks for your continued work on that, Jeff.
Sure.
Staying in the game despite quote-unquote retirement.
Yep. Thank
Tommy,
you.
did you have any thoughts from that meeting since you were there as well? Did we miss anything?
I thought it went very well. I'm looking forward to seeing what ordinances come out of it.
Likewise. All right, good. Moving on, Vinny, would you like to give us an update on Internet of Water?
Of course. Okay, so before I go through a walkthrough of the dashboard itself, I just wanted to highlight what were some of the goals that we want to accomplish during this entire process. One of them being that we want to provide all of this very useful information in a manner that could be easily understood by the everyday user to make, individual decision making, but also provide the information needed by decision makers across the city. And we also wanted to do this in a way that could be replicated by other municipalities in the future. So making all of the files easily or readily available so that they could then replicate it in their own municipalities. And I will start by saying that this is not the final version. I want to present this to all of you to, of course, get some feedback as to what the current data is, what data we should probably include, or, how we can modify it going forward. So this is, the Bernie Water Dashboard. This is what you will see when you open the webpage. You are directed to, of course, a map with the boundary of Bernie. And here we have a bunch of map layers that we can use to sort of, maybe see counties, river basins. A lot of these are helpful in terms of, looking at the state. And then you, of course, have some weather forecasts and things like that. Once automation is updated and inserted into the dashboard, this will be automated at whatever interval needed by the city. And as you'll see across the dashboard, there's going to be a lot of links that take you to more resources. For example, the forecast will take you to the precipitation center where you can probably access more information if you want it. Okay. So going back to the dashboard, if we click on our city utility, again, we'll be taken to our city where we first find a lot of info on the city's drought policy, the stages, awesome data like this, our demand data, again, that still needs to be linked properly in order to see the sort of table, but we have surface water, and we're going to be able to see all the stream gauges on the map, rain and drought. Again, once we click on a gauge, that'll give us more info on that. We go, again, we have websites that gives us more information, for example, the U.S. Drought Monitor, or even the Bernie Water Conservation website, right, where we could find more helpful information if needed. Then our groundwater with all our water wells. And across the dashboard, what you'll see is that we wanted to keep in the theme of the Internet of Water, which is ultimately the big goal that we want with respect to our water sources and the bodies of water. So if you click on that image, you're taken to the Internet of Water website, where again, we have all of these bodies of water. We want an Internet of Water. We can find all of this helpful information in one area. So ultimately, we want a bunch of these dashboards across the state of Texas, but in what we can hope would be the near future across the entire nation, right, where we could see all the bodies across the entire U.S. And so this is where I say that this could be easily accessed by other municipalities, where if you click that link, you're going to be taken to the GitHub folder, where you're going to find all the scripts that you need and the information that you'll need to make a dashboard like this one. And part of my contract is to also make a manual that directs individuals as to how these files work, how they're connected, and the type of resources you'll need to bring them all together to create the dashboard. So with that, that was a very brief sort of take through of the dashboard, but I want to give you all some time to maybe have some questions, feedback. Of course, you all can also, send questions my way at a different time if it's not coming to you at the moment. So that is what I'm here for.
Well, thank you very much. Certainly, as I look at it, it looks well organized, and there's a lot of information there. Probably need to spend some time walking through it and getting more familiar with it. But thanks for giving us this overview and starting this work. Any questions, comments?
Well, so I was just going to comment. So, one of the things that we're trying to do here is create a proof of concept because this is the first municipal dashboard. And one of the things that VNA's, and I'm kind of going to go, I know we have our immediate needs that we need to be able to look at water supply and all that stuff, but also we have greater ambitions for this. And one of the things we're running into is that there's no real standardization in terms of how utilities report their water data, much less even much of a requirement that it be made publicly available. And of course, that's not a problem here in Bernie because we have the data from the city. But going forward, we're trying to figure out, well, how can we make this more plug and play friendly? And honestly, that's going to have to be part of the piece, both for utilities and for groundwater conservation districts, which I've been finding are not that well coordinated as far as how they produce and share data, actually even process it. So, yeah. So anyway, so we're definitely discovering some things along those lines. But also we're going to have a meeting on Thursday. There's a technical advisory committee to talk about this more in detail. But we definitely want to get any first impressions or any wish list items to consider because, as VNA said, this is an early iteration. That before she starts to get really in depth with all the data connections, she wants to make sure she knows what she's trying to achieve. Because once you're locked in, it's hard to
get the bones in place.
Yeah, if I could offer, I like looking at the data. I like looking at the numbers. I like looking at tabulated information. Most people don't like that, so I must be strange in that regard. When I think of a dashboard, though, I think of the dashboard in my car, and I think from a visual presentation standpoint, at least on the homepage, if it opened up and I saw, like a dashboard, it looks very similar. I saw a gauge representation of how full, what's the capacity, where's Bernie City Lake sit right now? Where do we sit in an aquifer stage 1, 2, 3, or a drought stage 1, 2, 3, or 4? There were some visual deals there. Then when I want to dial down, I can dial down into the numbers. But if I could get that visual presentation, I think people would like that. Same with the drought index. If I want to dial in on the map, great. But if I just want to know where I'm at here, just a simple gauge presentation of that. I have no idea how one would do that, but I'm sure you're very creative and you can come up with that, so.
Good comments. On a related matter, have we reached out to any neighbors or anybody else in Texas about this project? And if so, what's the level of receptivity been?
So we haven't been promoting it to again, we're still very much in proof of concept, and VNA's been, discovering that it's not as easy as it initially might have seemed. And so we're trying to troubleshoot that. Now, we are talking to the Texas Water Development Board because they are very interested in this. And they're working on a state level hub, and they've hired a contractor to do that. And we're talking to those folks. In fact, you've been talking to them extensively about using what's the name of that?
CCAN.
CCAN, which is like you want to explain CCAN?
Yeah, so you could think about it like a sort of library or a buffet of data that exists, and you just go in there and you pick and choose the data that you're most interested in.
So they're embracing CCAN, and we're playing with this idea of, well, how do we encourage the growth of CCAN from a standpoint of municipal utilities and other water data sources? Because if that can be centralized through that library, as she describes it, then it's much easier to do these. It's sort of more of a plug and play to create a hub like this. And so again, we're chipping away, not just like trying to create a hub. That's not the end goal here. That's the end goal for Bernie. But the end goal, broadly speaking, is to also define what is it going to take to actually create an internet of water in Texas. So we are talking to the Water Development Board, but we're not promoting it. I'm going to be at a meeting of water advocates in a couple days, and I will be talking about the project, but we're not necessarily trying to sell it or encourage others to, other municipalities to jump on at this point. It's just premature.
Questions or comments?
Yeah, so my first impression when I was playing with it was that, I see if I'm a user and I'm looking at the My Utility portion, I look at the map layers, it seems really heavy on a regional side right now for data.
On what, I'm sorry?
It's on a regional scale.
Okay.
As opposed to a, local granular scale. And I wanted to see more, specific data. Now, I know that all the data is not in here for demand or,
Right.
My Utility. If you got I tried a couple of random addresses from around town to see what would happen, but I didn't, the data's not all in there, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
Can't see how that, I'm interested and excited to see how that comes in here. One thing because on the top piece, you got My Utility and demand data. It'd be nice to see something on the supply side, supply data, if there's some way to, because we have that data, right, so we can incorporate that to see, where the supplies are coming from and how that, how that water is being used. But right now, it looks very heavy on the regional scale and not so much on the local scale, and I think it may need to push the needle more towards a local, so you can really dial in and see how the city and the community's water is being used. And
Okay, yeah, and I think that's a very important comment that you make, because it was a sort of a topic of what sort of map layers we want to see, because a lot of these map layers, again, are not really useful on a very small local scale. For example, the forecasts, we could really zoom in, great, but then you get a lot more info once you start zooming out and you see, for example, like a Texas scale, this is what's happening in terms of weather and climate. Once you go into wells, for example, that is very local, right? It's just wells that are Bernie specific. And then again, river basins at this scale, it's helpful to see where Bernie lies, right? But if we zoom in a lot, we don't get to see that interaction as to what other major areas are within the same river basin, for example. So yeah, it's been an interesting boundary to, navigate what's too broad, what's more helpful if it is broad. And like you mentioned, once we get a lot of this very specific Bernie data in here, it's going to be a lot easier to navigate, right? Because then if we go, for example, here in the rain and drought, the watersheds are Bernie specific watersheds, or you're going to get that info that's just Bernie specific. And I will harness back to Ben's earlier comment about getting other utilities, right? Maybe one day we're going to see, this select a utility be a list of other utilities that have jumped on board, and it's going to be a lot more helpful data that could allow for some comparisons between, Bernie and neighbor A, B, C.
And you brought up a good point. You reminded me too, because I was keying in on the well data. I mean, you got the well layer on there, but you can click on the wells, but you don't have the data backup data
Right.
on the wells yet.
What's also another, what we talk about, a lot of issues that we didn't foresee coming is that a lot of these wells have a few marks of data. And so when you're trying to make, for example, a time series, you can't really make a lot of statistical analysis because you only have a few points, whereas you see other ones that have a lot more info and data points that you can make that analysis on.
What's the source of these wells?
So this is from the Cow Creek Groundwater
These are all
Conservation.
of our monitoring wells?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
and so I've noticed since I've been working on this, again, I've only been doing this for about a few months, there has been more, I want to say, constant inputting of data, but a lot of these do start, for example, in 2016, and it's once a month type things. And as, hopefully as more data is being collected, ramped up, and inputted, that's going to be a lot more helpful.
Yeah, and then you might consider, we talked to Mike, but you might consider, because I mean, when we look at the wells at Cow Creek, we cherry pick some of the old, some wells as our reference wells, the ones that we
Right.
look at because we have old data on them, so you can really see the trends as opposed to some of the newer ones, which you don't have any trend lines right yet. So you might kind of pick through that data and
Yeah.
look and see which really makes sense to you. I'd also ask that maybe noting the sources, so when you click on the wells, when you get there, obviously you may hopefully have we have well names and numbers,
Right.
and cross-referencing that, and then also noting where you got the data that this is the monitoring wells from Cow Creek is on here. So it'll be the same with the weather stations and other stream
Right.
gauges. You're getting that from USGS, I assume.
So for our precipitation data, it's two sources. It is some are through NOAA, the other ones are through the text Messinet, which provided a lot more sites to be used. I think with NOAA, there was only 3 gauges, which wasn't sufficient. So we just combined and are using 2.
So I talked to Michael Young, who's, of course, the project lead on this, and we do want to get together with Micah and Heath and talk about how better to integrate Cow Creek data into this for that very reason. So, again, this is a draft, if you will, or a sort of cursory thing. But I think those are very good points, and if you want to be a part of that conversation,
Sure, let me know.
be in there.
Along the same lines, will this have the opportunity or is there the ability to tie into the city's AMI system, even at a gross level, so you can see where we're at in terms of peak use, that sort of thing, volume, that kind of thing, historical trends, so forth. Is that information going to be accessible through this, or like Kurt was saying, even down to a specific house, is it going to get that granular if it takes place? Because we proposed having that ability, but probably more on a privatized level, so people could check their own and be aware of that. But just kind of trying to figure out how some of these pieces might fit together.
Yeah, so far the demand data that I've been working with is just, it has the breakdown of how much water has been received by source and, of course, the total of that, as well as wastewater. On a more granular household level, I think that's going to require a lot more conversations with the utility, with Mike Mann, and how to make that possible, but also protecting a lot of this information or data that maybe some individuals are not so easily wanting to make this public. The reason being is that so far, again, all of this is very public, right? We have all these files where For example, just the R script, if you were to click on one of these, you're going to be able to see the source and the specific gauges that we're pulling, right? We don't want all of that information to just exist on a public repository.
Yeah, no argument on the public-private issue. My question really was more, we have this system already in place in Bernie that
Right.
kicks off a bunch of data and may very well end up kicking off more data before it's over, depending on what council decides to do with that system. But with this, I mean, when we're talking about flows and usage and that sort of thing, it'd be nice to be able to access it here if the two systems would marry
Right.
with one another.
That could very well be a point of conversation to just connect these two, either to have an icon that clicks you and takes you to those resources, or on the flip side, have an icon on that part that takes you to here. And then I think in future work, mesh those two more directly, where we can have include, for example, log in to view that stuff in this dashboard, right? And we start incorporating some credential information. And I think that's more forward-looking, and that's definitely a path that could be explored.
Yeah, I guess to Tommy's comment about having that dashboard and having the visual representation, I think it can be powerful and also probably useful to see the graph of where we are when we're doing peak usage and given a comparison to baselines and that sort of thing. It just helps everybody keep on track too. So
Right.
if that's available on a pretty recent basis, if you can direct feed it in, it seems like it'd be helpful information. A lot of this looks like it goes to another source anyway. I just don't know if there's a way to interface that kind of
So
ever-changing
we
data.
don't have the AMI piece all tied in for sure. That's a.
Does it make sense to do it? I mean,
Well, I think on the AMI piece, you have to be careful. There's some recent legislation that prohibits disclosing usage data publicly. So if you had a specific login, that may allow you to check your own, but you may not be able to see that. So, I think there's going to be some legal issues that have to be checked out based on recent legislation.
can certainly see it at the private level, but on the gross level
On the gross level,
that's
you
all
definitely
available.
can do that. And,
Okay.
I think the other piece is maybe seeing what kind of data is available for us to put on that loading page of that dashboard. So maybe this group can provide some guidance on which of those items we want to see. So you can't put everything on the dashboard.
No.
What are the key things? What are the most important things? Is it capacity of the system? Is it gallons per capita per day that's being used? Is it water supply capacity? Is it pumping capacity? There's different things. What is it we want to see on that front dashboard? So maybe getting that menu of options of what could be there, so that we have an opportunity to provide some insight as to what we would like to see be those key items.
those are the things that I was thinking of in terms of the gross picture. I don't think anybody wants to be able to know specifically who's using how much water next door. But,
There's
you may
people
on a
who do that
localized
too,
level, but for this tool, it seems like that something like that would be helpful if it's not overly complicated. And it would be a nice mesh in taking the advanced, the AMI system like we're talking about and getting more out of it for the money we're already spending.
Well, like at SAWS, we put on our website the total production data. So it's total production. It's not even broken down by exact source and that sort of thing. But yeah, as you referred to, the legislation does prohibit a lot of that. It used to be like we have the top 10 water users that they run in
Right.
paper that they can no longer do because of the legislation. So.
But we could conglomerate based off of yeah.
Yeah.
I was just going to show this real quick. I'm just going to hold this up. That's just basically like a little sort of heat map, if you will, or it's not even a heat map, it's columns, but it's showing different water use across the region. And it's showing those red, really tall spikes are muds in the Travis County area.
Yeah.
And they are just abusing their water use. So we can still conglomerate it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And shame
That's
that
right.
way.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just a quick point. The recent infrastructure bill has some money available for data sets and these sorts of things, particularly for smaller communities that might be available. If there's, I don't know how much money there is left to put in this, but there might be an opportunity to get some federal funds to help do some of this. And then the other thing I would say in terms of this is a lot on the river. Not the river. The water user type people, not necessarily the consumer, and maybe that's what it's built for. But if there's a goal to expand this to sort of Joe Blow customer just clicking on it. I like the My Utility thing. They can click on it. Does that go to the website, or where does that go to? When you click on My Utility, City of Bernie, it goes to their website, or?
Right, so yeah, this one, it takes you to, and that's actually a question I was going to have for all of you and also the Technical Advisory Committee. There's a portion, so first, this link sends you directly to the Bernie Utilities webpage, whereas there's, I think it's down here in the credits, where it'll just take you to the broader Bernie webpage. I don't know if to standardize that across and just take you specifically to one constantly, or leave, sort of these two. Or like one's just overall Bernie, the other one's specifically utilities.
So, I mean, I think I would run it straight to the utilities myself. That's just my attitude. But nonetheless, I also sit there and go, well, is there a customer portal on this? I mean, is there a customer portal on the utilities website?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's two different utility portals. There's your utility billing portal that you can go in and pay your bill, and then there's also a City of Bernie Utility Manager app that gives you your usage of water, and I believe it's, if I remember correctly, it's got, well, let me show you. So this is basically the Bernie Utility Manager app that locks into the AMI system. And it just went away. So it gives you your bill, compare your last billing cycle. You can do your water usage, your temperature, and you can even pay part of your bill through this, which takes you to the other utility billing cycle. But this has been set up for Bernie for 2 or 3 years, Jeff?
I don't
Through
know,
the
I'm
AMI
retired, Mike.
system?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and so, but there's this one that you can download, set up your account if you have a utility account. I believe it gives you what you can see what water you used yesterday, the past week, the last month, or prior months. But Bernie already does, we do already have that. And then there's just the regular where you log in to pay your bill. And it also gives you some graphs of the water that you used throughout the month. And I believe they put the graph on the paper bills that goes out that shows your water usage. But that's what comes off the AMI system right now.
So I guess I was going to get at, linking to at least their existing utility system like this. I mean, this is a
Yes.
mobile app, but more for the web version, I guess. I don't know.
I believe there is a web version of
Okay,
but-
I wasn't aware that this existed. So, for example, on the data tab, demand data tab, link to where you could download that specific app if you want individualized.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be just something that's basically saying, see your own usage.
Right.
And they would have to log in and do their thing.
Yeah.
They would just take them to the Bernie site for now, because I don't think we need to iframe it or get fancy, in my opinion.
All right. Anything else, Tom? Other comments or questions? No?
Actually, one other thing too is from a standpoint of reservoirs, and I mean, is there, since we're partly on GBRA, partly Bernie Lake, obviously Bernie Lake data we can get from the city, but is there like a way that we can,
It's something that she can pull from USGS or probably even from our website too.
Okay.
But I mean, I think that's part of that may be one of the options for this dashboard is it can go out and pull information from other websites as well and link that up. And so, I mean, there's ways to do that. I think it really comes down to what all information. I mean, I think it's good to have all that information. What do you want on that landing page?
Yeah, what do you want to see?
So, and that's right now we've got all these different options. It's how do we narrow that down?
right.
Right.
But I like the idea of having reservoir, what the reservoir level is, what the percentage of full is on there, so you can see that. I mean, I think some other things that are key to see is when is the peak usage during the days, during the time of the day? Is it, so folks can see that. Because, capacity is not just a function of water supply, it's also a function of your ability to deliver that water supply to those customers.
It'd be a nice way to look at a quick glance and see if measures are working too. If you're doing things, you can do some trend analysis.
Can you shave that peak down?
Right. All right. If there's nothing further, we'll thank you, Vianney. Appreciate all your help. And if anybody's interested in that meeting, when is it, Thursday?
Thursday, yeah, 10 a.m. And if you're particularly interested, I can send you a link. So,
Okay.
But let's just say this is iterative, obviously, so we'll see what comes up.
All right. Mike, before we go, would you mind making sure there's nobody with their hand up that wanted to ask a question or say something?
I had a question.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Please.
I just thought
You get to be
So
official.
the folks online.
Grant Watanabe with the City of Fair Oaks Ranch. I think this is going to be a great tool once it's built up. Some of the dashboards I thought would be beneficial to me was just a basic demand projection versus supply curve kind of deal. I mean, usually supply is fairly constant, and demand's an increasing line. And at some point in the future, those are going to cross and intersect, and it'd be nice to know what that point is and a quick dashboard to see that. And then the other dashboard I thought might be beneficial is seeing how weather really affects your demand or consumption. Usually when you have higher temperatures, water use goes up, and when you have more rain or precipitation, water use goes down. So I thought maybe a dashboard showing that relationship might be interesting to see as well.
And Grant, by the way, you're supposed to be sitting up here so we can hear you all the time. All right. Oh, Milan.
I wasn't sure if this is open to the public.
It is now.
Okay, good deal. I appreciate that opportunity. Milan Mikulek, Kendall County resident, but I also represent the Cow Creek Groundwater Conservation District. I've been pointing out something that really piqued my attention. He showed up a graph on his laptop that shows the exorbitant demand of water consumed by MUDs and WCIDs in the Austin area. We have a number of these districts in Kendall County as well, a total of 6 altogether. And there's a large disparity about the quantity of water that's being used depending on where you are geographically and the purpose of the water district. Was it created for development, or was it created as WCID number 1 in comfort to just serve water needs in the sewer system, not to develop an area? So in my studies, I see districts, special purpose water districts, MUDs and WCIDs, and freshwater supply districts for that matter, that are concentrated, significant amount of land, significant amount of resources are going to consume, and yet publicizing what is being consumed other than this initial stab that Ben mentioned is virtually unknown. Municipal public water supply systems, Water Development Board requires surveys to be submitted, and I find really good data on the Water Development Board website, either historical or projected through the regional water plans. The observation to make would be if we could add something to that, water districts, specifically MUDs and WCIDs. There's a large database, a TCEQ, of where they are. We know locally that between Kendall, Comal, Hayes County, and Bear County for that matter, where these districts are, and probably can get an idea of what they're consuming. I think it'd be significant. So thank you for an opportunity to comment.
Is there a way to figure that? I mean,
So, I think you can get that data. Those districts have that data. You can either get the open records, you can get some of that data from TCQ or their local production companies, but it's going to be a process where someone's going to have to physically go and either online or in person grab that data. If you can get them to share that with you electronically, great. Some of them you probably will not be able to. I think that's where you're looking. You start here locally first and work out from Bernie to San Jose, to some of the other districts, Fair Oaks, to see which ones will help share that data so you don't have to manually go get it every month, every week, whatever it is that they report it, and build that from what you can. But the data's out there. It's just whether or not you want to do the research to go get it or whether you can get them to provide that to you. Some of them just probably won't.
Yeah, that's a great observation. I do this all the time. I'm a data nut. I'm like Tommy. I want tables. And I convert it into a graph, but the raw data, and it's there. And the point would be in a bigger policy discussion beyond this group, but you've been exposed to this, the water policy for the city, how MUDs in the city is going to be handled. But then at a state level, the state is being ignorant to a very large data gap, and why it's so difficult to get it and not find it in the public domain just confuses me. And I think it's a great opportunity to expose something for a bigger discussion at a policy level, at the state level, what it's worth. Thank you.
Yeah, and our limited foray into that it was a challenge to get information. Some of these, they might have one person or two people running the facility, and they don't have time, and their record keeping is what it is. So it's not great. And most people, I think, were willing to share that. It's just you got to be able to get on the radar and then get the data. And like I say, it may be handwritten, it may be on an Excel spreadsheet. It may not be that.
Or if San Jose Water would share it with us, because they've got it right there. They know what's going this way and what's going that way.
There may be business interest of why they do not.
I know. I'm just saying. It'd be awesome if they would.
Just saying. All right. Anything further on this topic? If not, we will move on to Mr. Nichols.
All right. I guess before we get started, I'd like to recognize that we have our governor-appointed board member from GBRA for Kendall County, under Wiesen, who is here today as well. I guess my main goal...
And a former board member and board chair, Pam Hodges.
Oh, yes. Hello, Pam. I would like to, I guess, update the committee on some discussions that GBRA has been having with our Western Canyon customers, which includes Bernie, it also includes Fair Oaks, includes San Jose, in talking about water supply and future water supplies. This is something that's ongoing with our customers, and I think it's important that the committee be aware of those discussions. I've gotten requests for every single customer of our Western Canyon system that if any of the water comes back that SAWS is allocated to at this point, there's a good chance that will be coming back in 2038. All of them have asked for all of that water. What we do know is that will probably be allocated at some point through those customers, but it is not enough to meet all of the demands that are needed from all those customers. So we've been in discussions with them on what options there are for future water supplies. The Canyon, our supplies out of Canyon Lake are fully committed, so that isn't an option. The next closest option really is SAWS. Donovan is here today, and he can probably talk a little bit about it. But SAWS at this point, it seems like there's not the ability to provide water up in Kendall County through their sources, and there may not be a desire at this point to do that as well. There's an indication that may not be. But if the city of Bernie is able to get that desire from SAWS, it will probably take it's going to take legislative action, but that's going to have to be legislative action that's probably going to have to be led by Bernie to get the ability for SAWS to come into Kendall County. SAWS has attempted that in the past, but it's going to take action by Bernie in which to do that. So that's going to be some business and political decisions on Bernie on which to do that. The only other options that are out there that we've identified really is potentially this group collectively. When I say collectively, that's the Western Canyon customers. That's Bernie, that's Fair Oaks, that's San Jose, is potentially participating in one of GBRA's future projects that we're developing now. We have several projects that we're working on to bring water to the I-35 corridor. As you probably know, the I-35 corridor between Austin and San Antonio is very much high growth, both through residential and through industrial and commercial. The growth has not slowed down. It has continued to pick up over the last several years. So we are developing projects that are going to develop water further south that are going to bring water into that I-35 corridor. Those projects potentially are going to bring 40 to 60,000 acre feet. And those projects involve a diversion system near Gonzales to pull surface excess flows along the Guadalupe River. It also is going to involve an off-channel reservoir in our lower basin where we have some of the most senior water rights. And it's going to involve pipelines to bring water from that mid-basin area and our lower basin area up to the I-35 corridor. All of our projects right now are developing projects to get it to the I-35 corridor. To get water from 35 to the Western Canyon is going to be, it's going to be expensive. You've got to go through rock. You've got to get additional elevation head you're going to have to pump against. But we've talked with the customers, and we've asked them to really take a look at what kind of water demands they think they're going to have, what water needs they're going to have over the next, not just the next 5, 10, 15, but the next 50 years. Because if you're going to want to be getting any water, you're going to have to be a part of that project, and you're going to have to find a way to connect to the I-35 corridor. And so all of the customers, including City of Bernie, have indicated that interest. And so we're going to start looking at a route and a corridor to connect the Western Canyon system to the I-35 corridor. It's about 15 miles through rock with significant elevation climb. But it's really, and that's, I don't know what the timing of that's going to be, but these projects that GBRA is developing is based on the demand that's in that area, and that demand is growing extremely fast. So we may be developing some of these projects within the next, moving into design within the next 12 to 24 months. I would encourage this group to get a better understanding from the City of Bernie on what their water demand for the utility side, what their water demand projections are, what's that's based on, because they have been doing projections and planning for this. But find out, let's get a better understanding what they're projecting, what the basis of those projections are. Is that for inside city? Is that for growing the city? Is that inside the ETJ? As we've talked about before in this committee meeting, is things that happen outside of Bernie affect what's going on in the water supplies and the water usage inside of Bernie. And so this may be an opportunity for this group to provide either some direction or guidance or support to the utility for how they're doing their planning and what that planning is going to be. But if the city does not participate in either in one of these projects to connect to the 35 corridor and participate in one of the projects with GBRA, or initiate legislative action to allow SAWS to bring water up into this area, there may not be an opportunity for the city to get additional water supplies in the future. These are the only two options that we have identified. So, I mean, I will say that the City of Bernie and the Utility Department has been very engaged with GBRA, and they've been very involved in it. But I think it's time that this committee also understand a little bit more of what the city is planning and projecting, and either provide support or provide additional guidance to the city and the utility on the direction that they're looking at for water demands and water supplies.
Thanks, sir. Donovan?
May I add something just to add to his discussion, because the current state water plan shows a deficit for Kendall County, and if you look through the supply, how we're going to make that up, everything in the plan right now for 2070 is that group of projects.
Right.
So if we're not participating, then our current water demand is not met through the state water plan. Yeah. We have about a 4,000 acre-foot deficit shown right now at 2070.
And what I can tell you is that what we've been seeing for the last couple of water plans is the growth is far exceeding what's been in the water plans. And what we're seeing on the I-35 corridor is pretty much very few entities are even coming close to hitting their projections. The growth is far exceeding that. And it's very hard to stay ahead of the curve when it takes 5, 10, 15 years to develop a water supply project. You have to be forward-thinking. The cheap water is gone. We're helping develop the cheap water right now. That's through conservation and providing recommendations. But, I think there's going to be some decisions that have to be made by utilities and entities on how you're going to use that water, how to more efficiently use it, but then also how much supplies do you want and where you intend to use those supplies, and what happens if the growth exceeds what you're projecting. Are you prepared for that? So,
Again, in the state water plan, we actually start to show a small deficit in 2030, which maybe could be made up through conservation or other things. It's a small number, but then 2040, it's obviously increasing. So, 10 to 15 years to get a project off the ground. You're in the window now, right?
Yeah.
That's why you're talking about starting these in the next 6
And there are
months.
some entities right now that are they're going to be hitting that deficit, needing these supplies even quicker, and so they may be participating in these projects sooner. So, this is where collectively it's cheaper to participate in some of these projects together instead of building a single pipeline or a single project for yourself. So it's understanding your needs and then understanding collectively what the other needs in this area are and what their timing is, and is there a way to participate together to share in some of those costs. The good news is the infrastructure cost for the Western Canyon project, when that project was built in 2004, 2005, everyone thought that cost was very expensive. I think everybody would love to have that price right now in that water and wish they had taken more at that time.
Never gonna get cheaper.
That debt service will go away in 2038. So that you are just paying operation cost for those facilities at that point. So there'll be this is something to take a look at. With the cost of these projects now, we're also seeing entities take a look at these costs of the projects for looking at it as a 100-year life cycle cost, not just looking at it on a 30-year or 1-year type. It is, you do have to come up with the funds, but if you start looking at it over a 100-year life cycle for what these are designed for, it makes these a little bit more easier to potentially pursue.
Well, I'm sorry, you were finishing up. Okay. I would just reiterate the issue of, what's happening in Gonzales County matters what's happening here. What matters in Burleson County with our Vista Ridge project matters what happens here, because all these waters are sort of moved around in different ways, and they impact them. As far as saws, obviously our big issue, there are a couple of issues there, but our big issue, which we've always talked about, is the legal prohibition to move Edwards water across the Edwards boundary. And there's some discussion about that. There have been a couple of attempts at the change in the law that have gone by the wayside. There may be opportunities in the future. I think, as you said, it needs to be led by a coalition, a group of people, primarily Bernie, the Edwards Aquifer Authority. There are other entities that are involved in it. Will certainly help in that. As far as our desire, you mentioned our SAW's desire to sell water out in different areas. I would say I'm fairly agnostic on that. I won't want to say we would like to sell, but I also don't want to say we don't want to sell. I think there's some opportunities there. Our goal is not to sell water. Our goal is to serve our customers. But if there's opportunities to help our neighbors, we're always good for that kind of approach. So I think there are opportunities there. Our big issue is that legislative prohibition on the Edwards. Separately, we are going through what we call our water management plan. We do a water management plan to plan our future 50 years out into advance. We're going through that process again this year. As part of that, we have a whole lot of big policy questions that we're asking our board. Some of those are, just growth patterns. Where do we want to grow? Do we want to use water in that growth pattern? How does the city want to approach that? But one of the big questions is, what is our future wholesale policy going forward? We've got that water coming down from the Vista Ridge right down the 130 corridor, right in the middle of where you guys are doing everything. And so maybe there are opportunities there that offset opportunities over here. So I think we certainly play a role in that regional approach to trying to figure out how to handle some of these growth opportunities throughout the state. But we're certainly there, and I guess I would say willing. Our issue is that our water right down the street here off of I-10 is just, it bleeds in Edwards water, and that's our prohibition. So. Separately, and this is a totally separate issue, although I'll bring it up because I think it's an appropriate forum. The reason we have approached that law in the past is really about our CCN area within Kendall County. We, 10 years ago, extended our CCN boundaries to meet the city of San Antonio's ETJ, which went slightly about 500 acres into Kendall County. So our issue of serving those customers with Edwards water has been the issue for us. I think because of the challenges that we had, what we've decided is, and I think our board has kind of made we'll call it a decision, or at least some pronouncements to probably transfer that CCN area from the Kendall County part of our CCN to transfer that to another utility. That could be Canyon Lake Water Supply Company. It could be the city of Bernie. It could be a number of different utilities. I would say those would be the primaries that we would want to talk to. But we would probably transfer that CCN area so it would be served by another utility.
So I'm kind of curious. So we're talking about, oh, there's this water, these pools of water, and we can move them all around. And oh boy, and I sit there and go, wow. Just taking Vista Ridge as an example, as I understand it, it's pulling off of leases up in Mason and Lee counties, Burleson, and those leases have they're contractual, right? And there's something like a 30-year on it.
The leases are actually perpetual. They have some continuation as long as they're being produced. They continue to.
So in other words, it doesn't go out in the open market at any point. They don't say, "Hey, look, SAWS, we're not providing to you guys anymore."
Correct. That would be. There are some. Correct. And the leases are actually held by a private entity. It's not us. Again, the Vista Ridge project is a P3, which means the private sector runs the entire project. We just hold out our bucket at the end of the line and pay for the water that we receive. So the private entity actually owns those contracts and the leases with the landowners. And so they have those in a perpetual sense. For us, the wells and the infrastructure become SAWS in 30 years. At the end of 30 years, they become ours. But we have a continuing 30-year agreement with the leaseholders to continue that relationship.
So the leaseholders can, 30 years from now, they can renegotiate the contract, or
it's about 60 years. But I think their leases, and that's just on the SAWS side, the SAWS approach to it. But the people that actually own the contracts that are leasing with the individuals, those go even longer. So we SAWS would have to negotiate with what's called Blue Water. They've got 3 or 4 different entities under their name. But
is that water then on the open market? I mean, in other words, is it competitive bidding, or is it just right of first refusal, or how does that work?
Not for 60 years.
So after 60 years, though. So after 60 years, you're hoping, I presume, that there's other supplies that could, maybe energy is more abundant. We can desalinate and pump from the coast. I don't know. Is that a gamble? Because it seems like
I think our idea is that it would continue
by paying more money to maintain it.
We actually have a fixed. At the end of the contract, it says we are paying what is our average of the 5-year Edwards leases. We just put that into the contract, so we actually already have a negotiation done for that next round. At the end of that round, then we would go through another negotiation.
Okay. But at that point, is it on the open market? In other words, they say, yeah, but each molecule of water is worth so much more than your previous contract, so therefore we're going to raise the price here. But actually, you know what? Dallas really wants to pull from us now. So that's the risk, I guess.
Sure. There are a million risks out there. That's certainly one of them. I can think of 10 other ones that are as pronounced as
Fair enough.
But a barrier to that, Ben, would be the infrastructure and distribution, where you already have a fully completed and depreciated infrastructure versus having to spend, if it's a couple $1 billion now in 60 years, it's going to be significantly higher than that if you wanted to move that water north to the Metroplex or somewhere. So.
What about if they want to use it locally? There's this sort of like, oh yeah, it's all good, guys, and I'm just like, really? Is it? And then when I talk to like Robert Mace from the Meadow Center, he's going, firmness is also questionable. And everyone's pulling all around, and when drought hits Texas, it hits statewide pretty much at times, right? So my point is that right now it's a spreadsheet matter. We're going, oh, can we make the spreadsheet work? But I sit there and go, what about the long-term resilience? What are the risks? I just think that's an important component before you start to commit to, oh yeah, this is going to be great. We're going to be fine, because 60 years from now, whoever's, paying for the water, if they have the water.
And a lot of that is a societal issue.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with change in mindsets, and that's 3 generations from now, and if we can't convert people over to be more conservation-minded, then we've failed anyway. So, just the graph you put up a minute ago about the muds, there's some opportunity there for change, significant opportunity for change. And the compounding of those small things over time, I think, would forestall a calamity. So, but you're right, there are some risks with it, but I think the risks are significantly mitigated by having planned out 60 years or 30 years or whatever the number may be, or 50-year planning cycle. And so for us here, in our duty back to the city is what do we want to say is a good options for their 50-year plan from now. I plan on being around in 50 years. I may not remember this conversation. Maybe I had to tip my head up straight or something, but I want to know how it goes. I want to say, hey, I had a hand in setting that forth. So.
Along those same lines, I mean, we're not just talking about us. These are, if this place is going to be livable in 100 years, you have to make plans now, period.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I don't disagree with any of that as far as planning goes and strategy goes. Yeah. The point's been made that all of these pipelines are all tying together, that growth is so rapid that people are struggling to keep up with it. We've had a conversation, Daryl and I did a while back, that, humanity tends to overuse its resources. We conserve over here. Oh, great, there's more. Somebody else, let's add a few more to our to the population. Okay, let's max it out. That's a tendency. And so that's a societal thing, like you're saying.
It is.
My point is I'm sitting there going, well, if we're going to be trying to secure that Bernie's future, are we just punting, kicking the ball down the road and saying, hey, we're going to invest in this billion-dollar pipeline with these other organizations. We're going to get hooked up to this water supply, and hey, the future is other people's problems. I mean, that's honestly kind of, I guess, how we approach things as humanity goes. But I just.
So, what are the alternatives to that?
That's a great question. Are we looking at all options? When I look out, out in San Diego, for example, I know they're using a lot more, they're reusing water a lot more for potable reuse, right, as an example. And we say, oh, that's just socially untenable. Well, so it's running out of water. One water
it functionally happens right now on the next guy downriver from the last guy. So
it bounces out, right?
Well, it's going to have to be a multi-pronged approach, right? We've talked about the cultural changes, and frankly, that was the first bite at the apple we took, was to talk about changing culture and tools to help affect that change. And so those have to start immediately, and they need to continue to progress, and I think we all agree with that. I used some of the illustrations when I was talking to the council. When I was a kid growing up, the side of the highways looked like rubbish. I mean, it was a throw pit. People just threw things out the window and didn't care. Don't mess with it. Texas came along, and we've seen cultural change. When I was a kid, people parked in handicap spots. That's become socially unacceptable. People don't do that anymore unless you are handicapped. So these cultural changes, we have to be serious about them. We have to have somebody to help drive them, put the process in place to do that. And I think the council is certainly receptive to that. The point of, from the very beginning, we've always wanted to reach out to our neighbors. And so hopefully we do something well enough that we can kind of link hands with neighbors, and then there'll be a consensus among us about how we use those resources. So if we're doing things right, and you see people like over in Wimberley, they're doing some pretty cool, interesting things and getting good results, that the spark is there. We just need to fuel the fire, and you find the right tools to do that. But we will never conserve our way out of the tremendous growth that we have and will likely continue to have. So we have to work on supply issues too. We just can't say, this is what God's given us, and so we're going to have to suck it up and get along with this. That's not smart-minded either. So I did have one question for Daryl, and this is probably my naivety, but you're talking about 40 to 60,000 acre feet being what you guys have the ability to lay hold of at some point in time. In terms of allotment, what portion of that is spoken for at this point, if any?
Well, I mean, we're in the process of talking with the regional entities in the I-35 corridor, and so we're trying to map out timing of not only our projects but some other projects. So I won't say that it's fully allocated at this point. I think we're in the process of planning for that right now to see what that looks like. But if you have an economic development project that comes along, whether it's like a Samsung or whether it's a server farm, I mean, they can take in 3, 5, 10, 15,000 acre feet very quickly. And you're seeing projects like that in the I-35 corridor, so you have to be prepared for that. I think we've got more projects down the road too, and part of that is what we have learned over the years is as we build these projects, we're having to move water from where it is to where it's needed, that we're creating a corridor and securing enough easement for future pipelines as well. And so to be able to plan for that. But, when we're looking at this freshwater supply, I think this 60,000, along with the other projects in the area, I think that's still going to be a challenge for just the I-35 corridor to meet the demands that we're seeing coming and the growth that we see coming. So I think at some point you're going to see brackish groundwater development, and at some point you're going to see seawater desalinization. We've got ASR, aquifer storage and recovery, we can add to get additional supplies. That's going to help both on supplies and on some pumping and peaking capacities. But at the end of the day, the growth that we're seeing and the projections that we're seeing, I think that you're going to see all of these projects are going to be fully allocated sooner than later.
And that was really the basis for the question is there still a seat at the table? And if so, because it's a chicken and egg thing, you're not going to commit resources till you know you got the opportunity to get something back, and it makes good financial sense, at least on some term basis, right? But if all the seats at the table are taken, then we need to look elsewhere.
There is a seat at the table, and I think that seat at the table is best served as a collective unit of this Western Canyon group. And I know that the city of Bernie, the city of Fair Oaks, and San Jose have all expressed interest in sharing in that seat at that table. I've encouraged every one of those entities, along with all the other entities in our RH35 corridor, to take a very serious look at your water demand projections, both for your needs and for other entities that you serve off of that, some of the smaller utilities who historically have not done a good job of planning for growth for these rural systems, for planning for any kind of growth beyond more than a couple of years. And when you have a system like that has, maybe 800 to 1,500 connections, and you have a development that's coming in that's 3,000 to 5,000 units, they're not prepared for that. And they haven't planned for that, both on the infrastructure side or a water supply side. But I think the process that's happening right now with all these entities is everyone's taking a very hard look at what their water demand projections might be over the next 40, 50 years if this growth happens and continues on for a number of years. And just to be prepared. Because if they're not prepared, they won't have an opportunity. There won't be a seat at the table later to join in. So that's what everyone is doing right now.
Is there a sense on timing right now as to how this is going to play out?
I would say that it could, timing-wise, could happen anywhere from the next 12 to probably 36 months. We will probably be under design on some of these projects.
So the time is now.
Time is now to look at that demand.
The engineering takes a while. So,
Yes.
yeah.
So you're suggesting it's a pipeline that goes all the way to I-35, or is it? Yeah.
Well, what we're looking at is number one is to get to the water supply sources. You're going to have to connect the existing system to the I-35 corridor. That's about probably 15 to 20 miles, depending on your route you take. That area is getting developed very rapidly too. So if that corridor is not locked up, that's going to be even more challenging to do. Whether it's constructed now or not, at least locking up that corridor. The other piece is analyzing the ability to move water and what improvements might have to be done on the existing system, so you're not having to run a line all the way to the Bernie area, and how can that best be maximized. I know San Jose is looking at that right now as well. They're looking at moving water themselves, so there are some opportunities to take a look at that. But the first step is how do you get a seat at the table for that water supply? Even if you don't construct the pipeline, how do you how do you participate potentially in some of these projects so you have water allocated in those projects, and it's just a matter of getting it from the 35 corridor either to Western Canyon or further out there. Even if it's not needed in Bernie's case, it may not be needed for the next 10 or 15 years. But if you don't participate now, you may not have that opportunity in 15 years when you need it.
On the same note, Darrell, when we talked about the supply side coming in to Kendall County, how much room is there for growth in the existing system? In other words, if we peak out, are we already tapped out, or how much room is there to push water this direction in terms of power and size of the straw, for lack of a better way of putting it?
So we're doing that analysis right now, and we have some preliminary information on what that looks like, and we are going to be meeting with San Jose, who's also building a pipeline that moves water generally from our Western Canyon facility area all the way to the Bulverde and almost to the Bergheim area. So that is going to potentially free up some capacity as well, possibly. But that analysis, we're undertaking that right now. So I hope to have more information over the next probably 6 months as far as what the ultimate capacity of that pipeline might be with additional pump stations and what the flow rates might be.
Because it seems like that'll be a very big factor. I mean, you can buy all the water you want, but if you can't get it here, it doesn't make much difference.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So did I hear that SAWS was going to let go of your supply of GBRA water?
There is a contract that GBRA has to provide water to SAWS. That contract expires at the end of 2037. SAWS has an option to renew for up to 4,000 acre feet. The terms of that renewal at this point look like it is more cost prohibitive for SAWS to do that, but they still have that option. And so of that 4,000 acre feet, 1,500 acre feet is committed to the Biederhorn development, which SAWS is currently serving that district, Kendall County WCID number 3, so that if SAWS is unable to serve them or somebody else is unable to serve them, come at the end of 2037, 1,500 acre feet of that is committed to serving that project. So, I mean, we are looking of how to potentially allocate that 2,500 acre feet or up to 4,000 should SAWS not renew, but we won't know for sure until several more years down the road.
I guess what I'm trying to poke at is that if you guys are supplying water, well, first of all, there's that other pool that potentially is available, but you're saying
that's not. We've looked at that and we've talked with our customers, and that is definitely not enough to meet the demands of all of our customers. And every single one of our customers has asked for every drop of that.
Right. What about? Are you guys supplying water currently toward I-35 that you wouldn't have to supply that way because now you have a pipeline coming that side and you could shift it the other way?
There is a potential to do some water swapping where you're providing water to customers east of 35 in exchange. That would free up some water out of Canyon that potentially could, but it's a minimal amount. There's a small amount of that. The challenge with that is everybody wants to have diverse supplies and not be sole sourced for an only supply. So I mean, there is, and there's a lot of infrastructure that's been put in place to deliver water from all these different sources. But there is the possibility for some of that. That is still not going to be enough to make up the difference.
Other questions or thoughts? Did I cut you off, Donovan?
Well, the other thing I was going to say a little bit earlier was that when we talk about the efficiency of some of these projects, when going into these larger groups of entities is actually much more efficient than Bernie going to do their own water supply and the city of the whatever going to do theirs. So the more they collaborate on these regional supplies, the more efficient it is and the more longer term the water lasts, I guess. So I think those are important, but definitely the diversification is a huge thing. You talked a little bit about obviously conservation and recycle the water system. There are a whole multitude of issues that need to be addressed over and above just the water supply issues. Water supply is a big piece, but absolutely we need to work on more conservation and more reuse of water and that sort of thing. Big fans of those.
Yeah, SAWS is doing great work in general in that regard.
So looking at the city's old water plan from 2015, the demand number just for the city by 2070 was just shy of 7,500 acre feet with a supply of 5,200 acre feet. So leaving a pretty reasonable deficit.
That was in 2015?
That was in 2015. That number is way outdated.
It's funny, when we're doing a groundwater project right now between G-Berry and Alliance. It's ultimately developing 30,000 acre feet of groundwater. The entities that all participated and signed up in 2017 and 2018 were hesitant. They signed up. Well, here we are in 2021. Water's not going to be delivered until 2023, 2024, and we have already had most of those entities say, we need more water from that project. Can you develop more water for that project? And so we're expanding that, and all we can do is expand it maybe another 9,000 acre feet, but there is more water needed just from when they signed up in 2017 that they did not sign up enough because the growth has continued to take place. So I'm not sure what the growth has been like in the Bernie or in the Bernie area. I mean, that's part of what this group has been looking at is it's not just what's happening in Bernie, it's what's happening in the region and what role does Bernie play as a regional entity and not just focused inside their city limits.
So when they built Bernie Lake in the 70s, it was going to solve our problem. And when but people were still hesitant. And when the Western Canyon project, I was under Edgar Schwartz as city administrator. And when the Western Canyon came and Ron was here, there was some hesitancy. I mean, the numbers were big, but now we look back with the value of hindsight and see that was a tremendously good point in the leadership of the city to step out and do that. And we're at that same type of inflection point now, where we get to do that forward casting, and to incorporate into our process and our DNA the societal piece as well, and the conservation piece. But we got to bring all these topics up. We got to have all these hard questions. And some of us aren't going to like. Some of it, all of us are going to like. Some of it, none of us are going to like. But I think that's the burden of leadership, is to do that, to vet all those things.
Just by way of summary, here's what I've heard on potential supply side. The 2038 supply issue, perhaps, that's a possibility. Possibly saws. Each one of these comes with its own problems. Using more reclaimed water, which I think is part of the conservation effort we've already discussed. But maybe that needs to be deeper and broader. I don't know. But it's something to consider as well. And aligning with others in the Western Canyon region to talk about extending over to the 35 corridor. Is there anything else out there that was brought up or needs to be brought up? You probably ought to dig around and see about additional sources, but I'll accept whatever advice you have on how we go about that, and then how we take a closer look at each of these and dig down, because I think what we need to do is probably, once we identify the potential supply sides, is come up with our best effort on a plan for each one. The immediacy of the Western Canyon one seems pretty significant, and I'd like some thoughts on how we go about assisting the city and our neighbors in putting something together, or whatever we might be able to do on that front.
I think it'd be good to hear from the city where they're currently at on their planning for demand side, to see what is needed on the supply side, but see what their planning involves, what geographic area that covers, what assumptions for growth that they're considering, just so we can have a better understanding of that and see whether or not they need to be more aggressive or more conservative.
Jeff, is that something that you've been part of?
Right. The 2015 study's been referenced a couple times, and that I had written that down too. We can certainly, if the group hasn't seen that yet, we could provide it for you or do a briefing on just that piece. We've already decided it's 7 years old and needs to be refreshed. So, yeah, and other than that, I know Mike and Nick were working on what I used to do with them, which was projecting growth at Esperanza and all the people we've committed to the city, within the city and out on the outside. Where that's at right now, I need to go back and find out, see where they're at on projections. But everything we've done for the last 5 to 10 years, the year 2035, 2037, has been That's it. I mean, from what we have in our current supplies, that's where we've been projecting for quite some time now that we're going to have an issue. That's now only 15 years away.
We may want to get, San Jose and look at what they're planning as well, and Fair Oaks, and kind of talk as a group.
So we have started those discussions with our wholesale customers to start looking at that on that side, and so we can follow back up with them, and I'll see if Fair Oaks and San Jose would like to share where they're at on some of their projections and deficits that they may be. But we have started those discussions with those entities.
And Jeff, this is an out of the blue question, but any sense on timing from our standpoint to get together numbers and that sort of things that we can have a meaningful conversation with neighbors?
Right. Now, I can't say that I do know that yet. I'd have to circle back with Nick and Mike. It shouldn't take long. Like I said, it's the only thing that's changing over the last several years is it keeps coming sooner. The growth has been substantial enough to keep changing the plan. So I don't think it'll take long. If we're meeting again a month from now, we should be able to talk about it.
So I'm just kind of curious, broadly speaking, as Kurt was saying, the state water plan does forecast essentially running out of legitimate supply at some point. Is that fair to say?
I think the state water plan shows when projects are needed based on some of their demand projections. In some cases, they show the deficits, but they usually try to identify a project to hit those deficits, is what Kurt talked about. And so it's part of it is identifying projects and identifying one of those deficits. It comes down to the entities, though, who take a harder look to see, are these projections, what's the timing of those projections, what's the timing to develop these projects. You just don't develop a project for 2,000 acre feet to bring water to Bernie from the I-35 corridor. You've got to match those projects up to get to that right size where it's feasible to actually to do the project. But what we've seen is the state water plan does a good job at least projecting population growth and demands statewide, in some cases regionally. But when you get down to sometimes on the county level or even smaller, it's not always hitting. It's definitely not hitting the numbers. And so that's why we've started, at least on the I-35 corridor, because of the tremendous growth, is to start looking at real projects and real growth that we're experiencing, and how do we merge those two together. And so it's probably a good idea to take a look at that now. And this exercise also feeds into the state water planning process, because you can share that information with the regional planning group so it can get in the state water plan. And then part of the benefits of getting the state water plan is it opens the door to using Water Development Board funds that were specifically created to provide below market financing for projects that are in the state water plan.
You gonna say something?
Well, I was just going to add just slightly. I mean, kind of your question, that the state water plan does show that if we didn't do anything, there's a need. Mm-hmm. And then the goal of the plan is to match up projects to fill that need. Mm-hmm. But it establishes the need and then tries to propose a way that we can address those. And that's the list of GBRA projects is currently what is shown as our addressing that need.
But it also sounds like at some point we're maxing out available freshwater supply, and we're going to have to jump into not just Brackish, but seawater desal.
Well, at some point, I mean, the growth is happening. I don't know how, as the River Authority or other entities, our job is to assist the communities with their water supply needs. We don't have the ability to close the door to tell people you can't move here or anything else. And so, I mean, I think what is our role to stop the growth, or is our role to help utilities meet the needs and help them manage those needs? You've got a state that's constantly that's recruiting businesses and growth. Mm-hmm. So that's not stopping. And one thing we have seen is no matter what, no one's been able to close that gate and stop the growth, stop the folks from moving in.
Well, to your point, the state water plan is a 50-year planning cycle. Mm-hmm. And so if you're looking longer than 50 years, there's new things that have to continually being
technology has to evolve.
And SAWS is already developing brackish groundwater. I mean, this is not something new to the region. And this is something that's going to be anticipated. I mean, for us, when you look at supplies, you're looking at what is the most feasible for development. That's cost, that is the quantity, that's the permitting, that's all those different things. So brackish groundwater development is going to be an option down the road. At this point, we feel that it's more feasible to develop the fresh supplies on a firm level before we move into the brackish side.
And we're producing about 10,000 acre feet out of our Brackish project right now. We've got it to expand up to about 33,000 acre feet. But, as we talked about, I think a sort of an empty chair in the room is the discussion, the larger policy discussions with the legislature on permitting, lots of different issues there to provide the long-term stability for the entity that's putting forth the investment to develop this water, but at the same time to preserve the resource through the groundwater district, river authorities, and the other entities out there. So there's an enormous conversation that'll be held over the next infinity, just with the legislature on how we handle those longer term stable projects, or to provide that stability. And Brackish is one of those that needs more discussion, I guess.
Jeff, I had a question for you as it relates to going forward with the city. And this committee is sort of a go out and help us find answers sort of a thing. But we're talking about a lot of action items, and some of them are pretty time sensitive. We certainly don't want to get out of our lane, but how do we assist council and other leaders in the community, be a resource for them in this most immediate need? Because it sounds like it requires a lot of coordination, a lot of data gathering, and getting decision makers together.
Right.
And that's really outside the scope of what we have the ability to do. But we do want to be a resource. So what are your thoughts?
Good question. I think obviously the council listened very carefully to what the committee had to say about conservation. I think we continue to follow that model. The question then would be, how do we keep them on board all along? Because this is going to be more complex and have a lot more money at the end of the discussion that's needed. So I take a lot of notes. I mean, obviously, I'm going to keep the city manager up to date, and I can work with Ben as to how he wants to communicate that to the council to keep them on board. I know that some of them watch these meetings after they've taken place, so I'm open to suggestions there, too, as to how to move that forward. They understand the importance and the major cost implications, coming forward in the next 15 years. So I know it has their attention, but there's also 1,000 other things going on, from building new parks to putting in sidewalks and everything else that has their attention as well. So I'm not sure how to keep that on the radar more than it already is. I think perhaps a more steady update provided by the committee would be in order at council meetings.
That was really my follow-up question is, do you think it's valuable for us to come up and provide a brief summary of what we talked about today in the next council meeting or relatively soon?
I do, and everybody here is known and respected by the council. It doesn't always have to be the chair, I'll say that. That you can get some assistance. Certainly, I know Saws, Donovan, you guys have been talking with Ben. He's told me about that. And hearing from GBRA is all good. There's a lot of new and good information for me today.
Yeah, I mean, not to steal any more of your time, Darrell, but that might be ideal just given your depth and breadth of knowledge on the subject. If we could maybe convince you to come to a council meeting and present for a few minutes.
What got said today would be very useful for them to hear from right now our two largest neighbors and partners in water.
Okay. Well, that seems like a reasonable next step on that issue. Are there other things about this Western Canyon supply side that we ought to be discussing right now?
So I do wonder if we need to hear, so great expertise, guys. I really appreciate all the knowledge here. There's so much. But I also wonder if it would be valuable to augment it with some additional expertise, whether it's Water Development Board folks. I've got somebody in mind who I think has a pretty good fix on the water situation. I also want to point out that, I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, okay, really respect feedback on this, but that the state water plan doesn't factor in things like evaporative loss and climate change adequately. And what are the implications there? And I hope that's not a bad word in here, but things change. So.
I think they do have, well, I don't, not really about climate change, although they plan for the drought of record, so that they assume that that's taking care of some of that. I think, for example, from our point, I mentioned we're going through our water management plan. We're stepping up the game this time to talk about climate change. We've got a consultant on board to see, and what will that mean? I mean, some people will say it's going to actually rain more often and provide more water. There'll just be longer pronounced droughts. We're going to work through that and how that impacts our direct supply as well. But yeah, there's a multitude of items that we put in our entity plan. The state plan is good, but there are a lot of downsides to the state plan. For example, in the last state plan, we had to make up a little gap, so we put in an ocean desal project. Well, we're not going to do an ocean desal project. It's kind of a paper exercise that we go through. But each entity does their own plan, or certainly we do our own plan, and we put in things like our conservation goals. What is our per capita? What are we going to drive that down to? And it can't just be a made-up number. We've got to, put our money where our mouth is. Are we going to drive that down? What is our non-revenue water in that particular area? Last time we did what we call a hybrid drought of record. It was the drought of record from the 50s, the duration, the 9 years, 10 years duration, but the intensity of the drought between 11 and 15. And so we just put in that, we layer in all these different conservative efforts to say, if that happens, it's going to drive our supplies down to here. How much do we have in storage, in our aquifer storage? And it's a big effort that we have. And by the way, also where you have it, where you have those supplies. Our growth is not happening. It is happening a lot over the city, but particularly here in the west and the north side. And so how are we going to get water to those particular areas as well? So a whole lot goes into that water management plan. I would assume, Bernie, the 2015 plan, I don't remember if I heard if they're going through a revision of that plan. I would think that would be the basis of any go forward alternative if they want to purchase new supplies or whatever they're going to do, that they would go through that management planning process through the city with a lot of input from people like us, people like this, lots of public input to figure out, okay, here's what we can do on conservation, and we think that will reduce our demand, and then here's what we really need in terms of supply. So I think all of those things are critical to do a single individual plan for each entity.
Well, I mean, and the state water planning process is a guide. It's not to take the place of detailed planning for each individual entity or regional entities. It is a guide, and it's not done to that level. And each regional planning group can choose to do collectively, if they want to look at supplies, something that's worse than the drought of record, they're able to do that. The Water Development Board does not require you to do one way or the other. That's left on a local level to decide that. As Donovan said, entities, they do their own detailed planning, and we do. And on top of that, for supplies, even for surface entities that have surface water supplies, you've got your firm yield. Well, you also have drought contingency measures that kick in, which even extend that water supply and offer reductions to everybody during times when you start getting drier conditions. And that's also a tool that you can use to adjust later on down the road too. So I mean, there's things that entities are already doing, and something GBRA is even doing is we're also working on habitat conservation plan, because we're seeing with the growth coming and the potential for endangered species and some other factors that could have impacts on water supply or water quality in the region, taking steps to make sure we protect both the environment and the water supplies that we're developing and the wastewater. So I mean, there's things that we're doing to try to prevent things that we see coming down the road that could cause challenges to one or the other. So I mean, that's where it comes down to the entities to do their own planning. Use the state water plan as a guide to try to help stir that and help look at that. But as Donovan says, sometimes there's projects in there that are paper exercises to show that you're meeting the needs.
All right. Before we move past the Western Canyon effort, and that's just in no particular order, but it sounded like it was the most immediate, I took down a couple of notes here. Jeff is going to look into getting an update on city data and sort of where the city's coming from on that arm of things. See if we can twist Daryl's and whomever else wants to attend arm and attend a city council meeting to help bring the city up to speed and answer any questions it may have regarding this potential project. Are there other thoughts or comments on how to be of assistance on the Western Canyon issue at this point?
I was wondering if Mark, Mark's on the committee, he's been sitting online, if he's got anything he wants to add.
Me, Mark?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, you, Mark, yes.
As opposed to what issue? Or in regards to which issue? Which issue?
No, I just, I know you're on the committee, and obviously we talked about, this from a regional perspective, and I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add in from the EAA's viewpoint or from your experience.
Well, I mean, from the EAA standpoint, I consider my participation on this committee as a resource. I'm happy to talk about some of the legal impediments to the use of the EAA, at least as they sit in our current legislation now. I think that the concerns about the increased demand that's coming to the region are important, and they're extremely time sensitive, just as everyone has said. And I think the city needs to really look at all their options, which would be whatever partnerships they need to make, whether it's looking at joining other entities' projects or trying to look at their own, whether that be ASR or whether that be trying to work on some of the other emerging projects in the region.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
All right, not hearing any other comments. Certainly welcome those later on. If you have a great idea, please feel free to share it, and we'll try to put it into action before the next meeting. The 2038 supply issue, just backing up, I assume we've done all that we can do at this point.
Correct. There's nothing that I need from any additional, from any of our customers. We're doing analysis on how we may allocate that, but we're also looking at, several of the customers have expressed an interest in having some kind of peak flow added to the facilities as well. So we're looking at that as well. Our goal is to have that potential allocation and what it would look like to go to peak flow for some of the customers done by sometime early 2025.
Do you think that, or maybe a better question is, when do you think that on the supply side, when we talked about the ability to intake, that information from GPRA is going to be available?
So I would like to, I said we're going to shoot for 6 months we've already started looking at that to see what that options. I've got some further discussions with San Jose and what infrastructure they're building to move water, and how much supply they're going to be moving through their infrastructure, and maybe how much, and whether that frees up any capacity in our Western Canyon system. So.
I noticed Mr. Biddle's on. I didn't know if he had anything to add to this conversation.
I can share with you that, like Daryl said, we are building a pipeline, a 16-inch pipeline down Ammon Road. Right now, it's the phase one is complete. It stops just short, about a mile short of Blanco. The plan is for phase two. It's in design. We're going to move that. We're going to build that pipeline all the way down to Ammon Road and near Blanco Road, and that's where it's going to stop for now. We're looking at the possibility of extending all the way to, and I never get the number right. Is it 31? What is that? Ralph Fair Road, I call it. I've always called it Ralph Fair Road, but
3351.
3351, yeah. At some point is where we think because there are interests out there for water supply, so that's what our plan is now. As far as capacity, I'll have to, we've been talking to some of the engineers with GBRA that work with Daryl, and we'll figure out what kind of capacity we're going to need and what's going to be available where we can move more water. I mean, running 2 parallel 16-inch mains out that direction is quite a bit of capacity, but we're talking about quite a bit of water. So we'll work on, we haven't done that yet, but we can certainly work with Daryl and his team to determine what kind of capacities there are there.
From your standpoint, Larry, is there something we can do as a committee to help assist San Jose and City of Bernie and other Western Canyon folks get together and or provide support for them?
I don't think there's anything right now. I think Daryl's got it. I think we're right. We've got to work on it. We're working on our plan. I'm glad to hear that you guys can have something in a month. We're probably 6 to 8 months out before we're ready because our area keeps growing. We keep having more and more water systems, and so we're going to have to take more of a entire CCN Western Comal County approach to water supply and what's going to happen in all of Comal County. And now we've added, the Kendall West system, and I don't know how much more that could potentially grow, adjacent to the city so we've got to do that evaluation. And I think that's more of a 6 to 8 month approach before we'll have that number and be able to. But in the meantime, if there's something that we could do with the city, we'll certainly reach out to you and let you know.
Patrick, for clarity, I said we could have in a month our projected growth numbers. I don't think we'd have a plan or something more elaborate than that.
I wasn't looking at anything with a bow on it, Jeff.
We'll have it figured out in about 30 days. And we're working on the budget right now, so it just plays into that we would be doing those projections.
Okay, thanks, sir. All right, well, Larry, if you don't mind, keep us apprised. Maybe next month there would be some value in having you kind of give us an overview of what you guys are working on, just so we have a sense of it, in the hopes that we'll be collaborating some in the future and we'll have a better picture of what's going on regionally.
Absolutely. We definitely want to be a partner with all of the Western Canyon group so that we can solve this, economies of scale and putting it together. And doing it once, and like Daryl said, there's opportunities are few and far between. So if we don't work together and get this done right this time, then there may not be another chance.
I'm just curious, what does it mean if there isn't another chance? I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, it's good. From my perspective, it's something that we're going to have to try to develop something on our own, which is going to be more costly. And it's going to be a project just for us, which, building pipelines from one part from 35 just for our own customers in Kendall West is not, that's just not a good plan. So we've got to work together as a group to have a regional solution instead of an individual solution.
Yeah, I think
But even from a standpoint of cost prohibition, or it means it's more expensive, it's economies sort of play out where people maybe spend less or develop even less because the cost is so significant. And I don't see anything wrong with throwing that out there. There's this assumption, we have to bring it because people are coming. Well, you bring it, people do come. Well, wait a minute, what if it's so expensive to bring it that it's harder for people to come? Well, how does that play out?
Well, I think that's also can be addressed in rates. I think you can make your rates a little bit prohibitive to that also.
Yeah, it's a better of a market economy. The numbers are going to do what the numbers are going to do, and people will make choices based on those. That being said, we can end up in such a deficit because people are not the average Joe is not always driven by looking to make sure there's adequate supplies of all the resources they need to move somewhere. They just have that expectation built into them. Oh, you build me a house, surely I'll have water or electricity or gas or whatever it is to provide for that house.
Yes.
Well, I don't think you just slam on the brakes just for funsies and see what happens. I don't think that's good planning either. Your point notwithstanding. Trying to respect everybody's time here. On the SAW issue, it sounds like there's a lot of politics involved in that, but Mark, since you're still on, are you in a position to provide us with, I think you mentioned, sort of the legislative issues that would need to be overcome, maybe outline those, maybe not even now, but maybe the next time we get together, give us a 5-minute overview of the specific legislature that needs to be changed, if the hearts and minds were aligned to do so?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. Any other thoughts on the SAW issue?
I have lots of thoughts on the SAW issue.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of them, but in terms of just analyzing that and being able to report back to council on what would be involved from a practical standpoint.
Well, I guess my one thought on that is that, again, I hear from different audiences, and they don't have a bone in the game regionally or financially, but that they're expressing concerns about firmness relative to projected supply, right? Because it hasn't really been hit, that aquifer, to my knowledge. So you might be like, dude, that's ridiculous. I don't know, but I'm just saying that's the scuttle I'm getting from pretty knowledgeable people.
About which supply?
Coming up out of from the Vista Ridge supply line. From yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly talk, anytime we can talk about the firmness of salt supplies, each one of them has its own, there's plenty to discuss about each individual supply. That's why we develop, 15 different projects, 9 different sources, and we plan out based off of those very conservative plans to assume that those things happen. We assume that our Edwards supply reduces by almost 50%, for example.
Right.
Vista Ridge, there's some reduction there, and so you have to plan for all of those, and I'm
So
can talk about that.
I guess one question I would have broadly on that one is it would be if that supply was tapped into, it wouldn't be dependent on sort of one resource. It's just based and is it utilities oftentimes have to guarantee customers supply. Is it come with the same guarantees, or are there liabilities on say even San Jose Water's end if they were to seek that supply? You see what I'm saying? In other words, certain contracts run out, certain supply sources run out, and you guys say, yeah, but we're here for the city of San Antonio when it all comes down to it. Or
Sure.
are you then contractually obligated to?
Again, a number of facets within that. In this particular pipeline that's on I-10 that would probably serve this area, it's really Canyon Lake water, Western Canyon water, or Edwards Aquifer water. Mm-hmm. And so we toggle those back and forth. It's primarily Canyon Lake, but in 2038, then it's primarily Edwards water. And so, if the legislation is never changed, then if there were a wholesale out of that particular line, that would be problematic. We would need to address it in a contract that after 2038 you can't get Edwards water unless legislation has changed. Right now, Vista Ridge isn't envisioned to serve in this area. So if you're worried about the long-term efficacy of the Vista Ridge project, that particular project, we've got pipeline coming from, for example, our ASR plant that will come all the way to Anderson Pump Station, which is at 1604 and 151 area, and so just a little further south. All of our supplies, we built so many different redundancies into our sources that they survive so many different challenges, with one big exception, which is Winter Storm Uri, which we had our challenges, and so now we're going to go spend $200 million putting generators all over the place. But
my question was more actually along the lines of, okay, you guys have just a whole body of water, right? Just from wherever. Sure. And, as a utility, you've supplied the city of San Antonio. And then suddenly, okay, now you're going to go extend this water supply out elsewhere. And then say in Kendall County's sake, say you guys say, all right, we're not going to go be a provider, but we're willing to sell the water into Kendall County. Is that water, would it sort of like with GBRA water, there's sort of this contractual agreement that, yeah, we are going to be consistent with that period versus, oh gosh, we're running short here in San Antonio itself, so we got to pull the plug on you guys. In other words, is there, and maybe that's a contractual thing between you guys and the water provider, but it is one of my concerns is pulling the plug. Yeah.
Sure. We have wholesale agreements right now with different entities, and there are obviously some things in there, but it's not as simple as if SAWS is running low, we're going to take your water away kind of thing. It's a essentially guaranteed supply as much as a water utility can guarantee a supply, but it's a guaranteed supply for whatever term that contract is. And then sometimes, for example, with the Biedenharn, we required that they, at the end of our supply, the 2037 timeframe, that they have another agreement in place already to meet their future supply from 2038 going beyond. And that's where they went through GBRA. So lots of different intricacies there. But yes, you do plan for those kinds of things, but it's all very much spelled out in the contract. The utilities very much know what those, if there are downsides to it, everyone knows what those areas are. But we don't have anything that just says if SAWS is running low, you don't get any water kind of thing.
Well, I mean, so you said it earlier, is to serve your customers. And customers defined as residential customers, commercial customers, and people you're selling wholesale supply to, irrespective of whether they're residents of the city of San Antonio.
Sure.
That's a non-issue.
Right.
So
That's
I think that goes to your question.
It may be a fruitless question, but I did have one. If we could take the politics out of it and the legal issues that currently exist, is it possible to have you come back and take an analysis and say, well, if SAWS was going to sell some wholesale water, what kind of quantities would be available and over what period of time?
Yeah.
That seems like a reasonable exercise to do because there's no reason in ever having the conversation if there's no supply there. So is that something that you guys can look at and let us know?
Yeah, absolutely, and it fits right into our water management planning process that we're going through. We talked about it, what our supplies are, what the firmness is of those supplies, and some of those. So I can do a highly abbreviated. You tell me if you want I can give you the 8-hour version, I can give you the 20-minute version, or the 2-minute version.
Well, 8 hours.
Well, you can tape it for Tommy.
You just tell me how many minutes, and I'll tailor it to however you want.
I think 20 minutes on it would be certainly worth hearing. Don't know what anybody else thinks, but just the what ifs.
Good luck
right?
keeping it to 20 minutes.
Well, I mean, if there's 1,000 acre feet there, then I'm not sure it's worth going through the brain damage of having another conversation. But if there's more potentially available, then maybe it needs to be considered as a viable potential source. So, all right. So we'll book you down next time for that, Donovan, if you don't mind. The last thing I had on my list was reclaimed water. I'm not sure what we can offer on that front. I think Mike is pretty much on top of it in as much as he can be, but welcome your thoughts, Jeff.
For reclaimed water keeps coming up as a potential source. Obviously, right now we're using it as an alternative to potable water on landscaping, which is not the greatest use either, right? So in the 2015 plan, there were thoughts about sending the supply back up to our lake and actually reusing it as potable water. So I think from the city standpoint, the next up is to consider, as Esperanza continues to grow and other utilities are developments around it. In the past we've thought, well, this is great. We're going to supply reclaimed water for landscape. But to everyone's point, we should be using less and less on landscape as we go forward. So I think there's some rethinking that needs to be done on the city side about the reclaimed water system going forward. That's also a big part of that 2015 plan that needs to be refreshed, and we're back to that again. And right now, no, there is no plan to re-examine that plan, but there should be, and we're budgeting right now. The city's budgeting right now, so that's on my list too of things to report back. Is that we really need to have that done now, this coming year. We can have that done in 3 weeks as well. No, just kidding. That is a 6-8 month process to look at that plan. So,
has the research been done on changing the mentality of reclaimed water and pumping it back into the lake, or has it just been kicked around, or is it
kicked around? I mean, that was again mentioned in 2015 at the time. It was on boxes of things we could do. Expand the lake itself by, creating more, revising the dam and having more possible source there. So that study was really pretty well done, and it had some good ideas in it. ACSR was in there as well.
Right.
So again, I just think it needs to have a new, fresh look 7 years later because so much has changed.
Is there value in us seeing if we can find someone who's sort of an expert in that area, having them come and present, pick their brain a little bit, let them look at what we've got?
On what?
Reclaimed water.
On reclaimed water.
Yeah. I mean, find somebody who's an industry professional that can come in and say, here's basically what your system looks like, and here are some options and ballpark ranges and that sort of thing. I don't know, would that be beneficial if we can get that kind of information and provide it to the city?
Sure. And I think that would be part of the revision of the study as well. It was HDR that did the study for us in 2015.
Okay.
In the 2011 drought, Milan, you may remember this. Didn't the city of Wichita Falls switch to direct 100% direct reuse? Yeah.
Yeah, I think they went pipe to pipe. They send it with whatever to their raw water intake for their treatment plant. That's
Okay.
what they did, and then they've discontinued that. I think they're still doing discharge into their lake, but I think they had bypassed the discharge to the lake and went pipe to pipe.
Well, and the other piece there too, of course, is polishing it to better standards. I know Dallas does a lot of essentially recycling, but again, there's a lot of effluent that just gets taken back up with other constituents that you may not. I don't know. That are not that desirable to have in your water supply. So have you guys looked at this?
Well, I was going to say, obviously we've got the largest purple pipe system in the nation, so we can certainly talk a little bit about that issue. One challenge we have, and maybe it's more of a political challenge, but it would extend up to here. We actually don't take our recycled water into the recharge zone, into the Edwards Aquifer recharge zone. You guys are mostly in the contributing, but obviously as you get down to Buckwheaties Creek, you're into recharge, and so Edwards Aquifer Authority may have some comments about that as well. But but it's more of a environmental and political consideration you'll want to have. But we, some of the issues are redundancy. We can talk about some of that. We don't maintain our recycle line like we would a potable line in terms of redundancy. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to look at it from a standpoint of how can we polish the water so that if it was to you sort of it's almost like laundering it when you throw it through a reservoir and then pump it back out, right? Unless it was to be truly scrubbed, meaning, run it through activated charcoal or constructed wetlands, et cetera.
Well, it would be interesting to understand how much of it can truly be reclaimed and reused and what the cost is, because at the end of the day, it's a dollars and cents analysis, right? Okay. Well, we'll see if we can find someone who can speak to that, and then maybe Donovan, your folks can enlighten us further if we find out that there's something worth talking about there. But
I'll look for some people, but yeah, if you guys know people, then let's go.
yeah, please. Yeah, all ideas are welcome. So, all right, it gives us a working action list. I will circulate that back to everybody, just so we all know who's doing what homework between now and the next meeting. Anything else for the good of the order before we call it a day?
I guess we don't do public comments at the end.
Well, we certainly can. If anyone has comments, thoughts they'd like to share, happy to take those now before we close the meeting. One.
Had a hunch.
Really don't want to take up too much more of your time. You guys have been very patient, very thorough. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk again. Ben brought up a huge point, and I captured it in an article I wrote for the Hill Country Weekly last week. I don't know if you all have seen this. I'll leave a couple copies here. But it focuses on the chart that Ben mentioned earlier. And again, the focus for me is this alternative is focused on the gallon per capita per day. And I'll make significant recognition that in the memo, technical memo that was published, there's a direct reference to the Water Development Board planning and how the new water plan, for the first time ever, actually had a chapter devoted strictly to water conservation. So even though it cannot conserve you out of it, you can certainly get a lot more miles out of what we have. And that goes down to reducing that 140 choice that most people made in the regional water plans. 16 of the group, majority of the 16 regional water planning groups chose 140. I think by using the chart that Ben threw up there, you can see there's a lot of room for improvement. And not to poke anybody in the eye, but I mean, 800, 734, 500, 156, 200s, 140 still seems like a really high number, and could be conceivably affordable and effective to reduce it to a much lower level. San Antonio, for example, 118, huge example. And the last thing I want to throw on the table, a lot of references to the 2015 report. Very familiar with the water side. Most people are not familiar that there's a wastewater side also. Very, very important to read from the engineering perspective what can be done with the available resource. And lastly, referencing 2015, there's a wonderful report from the City of San Antonio and Fair Oaks Ranch. It's published in 2015. It's a water policy study report. There's a significant discussion in there about risks of all the projects you guys were talking about today. I think it's very, very insightful. It's relevant. Then Councilman Nierenberg authored it or suggested it. And I'm sure he stands behind it today. So again, appreciate all the work you guys are doing. Really like being included, and good luck.
Thanks. Hey, Ben, is that something you have a copy of, the report, the 2015 report?
I don't have that. That's not, well, we can get it easy. The 2015.
What's the question?
He wants the 2015 report.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah, if you don't mind, give it to me or Ben.
Of course not. I'll
Let's put
send
it
you
up on the website, and we'll circulate it so everybody can read it if they haven't already.
Extremely helpful. It was kind of controversial because it was released in the draft form.
Controversial.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you guys are having conversations that are riveting to me because the stuff that I've seen, read before, participated in. And again, compliments to the thoroughness that you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Anyone else? All right, we're adjourned until next time. Thank you so much for your time.
Good meeting.
For official.